Welcome, dear listeners. How was your day? Share it with me. And if you like, what's on your mind? I read every comment. It motivates me. If you like these kinds of stories, you can subscribe. Now, relax. The story is about to begin. Chapter 1. An Ordinary Morning. The fog that had settled over London that morning was thicker than usual. The cobblestones of Baker Street still bore the traces of the rain that had fallen throughout the night, and the faint light of the street lamps was slowly fading with the dawn. The light streaming from the window of 221B stood out like a warm harbour in this gloomy landscape. Sherlock Holmes sat in his usual chair, looking at a newspaper spread open on his lap. But his eyes were not on the lines. They were fixed on a single point, lost in thought. The room was silent except for the crackling of the fireplace and the distant sound of horse-drawn carriages outside. Dr. John Watson sat at the breakfast table biting into his buttered toast, occasionally casting anxious glances at his friend. He knew this state of Holmes. The restlessness brought on by the absence of a case was like an invisible wolf gnawing at the detective's soul. It had been 2 weeks since the last case, and Holmes was withdrawing more and more into himself with each passing day. "The weather is supposed to be nice today," Watson said, breaking the silence. "Maybe we could go for a walk. We could go to Hyde Park." Holmes muttered without lowering the newspaper. "The weather won't be nice, Watson. It will rain this afternoon. Maybe even a storm." Watson looked out the window. The fog was beginning to lift, and a faint blue was visible in the sky. "Where did you get that from? The sky looks quite clear." "I didn't look at the sky," said Holmes, finally folding the newspaper and placing it on the table. "I looked at Mrs. Hudson's cat. It hasn't left the fireplace since morning, and its fur is standing on end. Cats are extremely sensitive to atmospheric pressure changes. Also, my joints ache, which indicates increased humidity. By this afternoon, at the latest by evening, a serious downpour is expected." Watson smiled slightly. His friend's observations always surprised him. The ability to draw meaning from even the most mundane details was what set Holmes apart from everyone else. "Well," said Watson, taking a sip of his tea, "if there's no walk, what do you plan to do? Sit in this chair for another day, staring at the ceiling?" Holmes rose and walked to the window. He looked out at the street below. People were going about their business. Vendors were setting up their stalls. Children were running to school. An ordinary London morning. Ordinary people. Ordinary lives. "Hundreds of crimes are committed in London every day, Watson," said Holmes, his voice thoughtful. "Thefts, frauds, blackmail, murders. But most of them are so simple that even Scotland Yard can solve them. The remaining few, those are my area of interest. The complex ones. The ones that defy logic. The ones that hide the truth behind appearances." "Perhaps such a case will come today," Watson said optimistically. Holmes shrugged. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I'll struggle with this monotony for another week. The human mind, Watson, is a machine that must be constantly worked. When it stops, it rusts, it dulls, it becomes useless." Just then the sound of the door opening and closing was heard from below. Then footsteps on the stairs. Mrs. Hudson's voice rang out, "Sir, there's someone here to see you." Holmes's eyes lit up. He straightened his back and turned to Watson. "There you go, Watson. Maybe today is the day." The door opened and Mrs. Hudson entered. The old woman's face bore its usual patient expression, but there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "Inspector Lestrade, Mr. Holmes," she said. "He wishes to see you. He said it was quite urgent." Holmes rubbed his hands together. "Lestrade. Excellent. Show him in, Mrs. Hudson, and perhaps you could bring some more tea. Mrs. Hudson nodded and withdrew. A few seconds later, Inspector Lestrade's familiar silhouette appeared in the doorway. Lestrade was one of Scotland Yard's most experienced detectives. He was short, with stern features, and always neatly dressed. His relationship with Holmes was complex. On the one hand, he was skeptical of the detective's methods, yet on the other, he never hesitated to call on him for the most difficult cases. Today, the expression on his face seemed more tense than usual. "Holmes," said Lestrade as he entered. "Watson, good morning." "Good morning, Inspector," said Holmes, turning back to his chair. "Sit down. Tea will be served. And please, tell me about your case. From the look on your face, I can tell this is no ordinary theft." Lestrade sat down in the opposite chair and placed his hat on his knees. He took a deep breath. "Murder," he said briefly. "Last night, in the Whitechapel district at Camden Apartments, a young woman. Her name was Rose Delaney." Holmes narrowed his eyes. "Continue." 25 years old, said Lestrade, taking out his notebook. "She lived alone. Around 11 o'clock last night, her neighbour Margaret Hollow noticed the door was ajar as she passed by her apartment. She called out, and when she got no answer, she went in. She found the body in the bedroom, next to the bed." "Cause of death?" asked Watson, his doctor's instincts kicking in. "A single stab wound," said Lestrade. "In the chest, directly to the heart. Targeted and fatal. It's believed the victim died without suffering." Holmes clasped his fingers under his chin. "What about the crime scene?" "Now here's the interesting part," said Lestrade, frowning. "No signs of forced entry on the door. The lock is intact. One window was open, but it wasn't forced. Minimal signs of a struggle in the house. Belongings are in place, nothing stolen." "So the victim knew the killer," said Holmes. "Or the killer somehow managed to get inside, which means the door was open. Or they had a key." "That's exactly what we thought," said Lestrade. "At first glance, it looks like an isolated act of violence resulting from a sudden argument with someone he knew. An unplanned, momentary crime of passion." Holmes smiled slightly. "But you don't believe that, do you, Lestrade? Otherwise, you wouldn't have come here." Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. "Something doesn't add up, Holmes. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I have a feeling. This case isn't as simple as it seems." "It's good that you trust your instincts," said Holmes. "Even though they're often wrong, sometimes they point you in the right direction. Tell me more. What do you know about the victim?" Lestrade looked at his notebook. "Rose Delaney, 25 years old. She worked as an editorial assistant at a publishing house. Her family lives outside London. Her father, Arthur Delaney, is a retired teacher. She had been living alone in this apartment for 2 years. Her neighbours describe her as quiet and polite. Her social life was limited. She mostly stayed home reading books and occasionally met with friends." "Boyfriend?" Watson asked. "None at the moment, apparently," said Lestrade. "But she's had a few relationships in the past. We're still investigating the details." Holmes stood up and began pacing around the room. This was a habit he had when thinking. His steps were steady, his gaze fixed on a single point. "What are the neighbours saying?" he asked. "Did anyone hear anything on the night of the incident?" "Margaret Hollow, the neighbour who found the body, said she heard a brief noise around 10 o'clock that night," said Lestrade. "Like the sound of an argument, but it was very short. Then silence. Some of the other neighbours said similar things, short, abrupt sounds, then nothing." "Interesting," said Holmes. An argument, but it didn't last long. This suggests the incident unfolded quickly. Was it an unplanned outburst of anger or a swift and decisive action? The distinction is important, Lestrade. What do you mean? Holmes turned back to the window and looked outside. Murder in the heat of passion usually involves an element of chaos, a struggle, broken objects, multiple wounds. But you said the furniture was in place. A single stab wound straight to the heart. That's either a very lucky coincidence or the killer knew what he was doing. Lestrade raised his eyebrows. So you're saying it was a professional killer? I'm not saying anything yet, said Holmes. I'm just observing. I need more information to draw conclusions. I need to see the crime scene. Watson stood up. I'm coming too. Holmes looked at his friend and smiled slightly. Of course you're coming, Watson. Your medical knowledge might be useful in this case. Besides, you'll need to take notes. This case could be interesting. Lestrade also stood up. The car is waiting downstairs. We can leave immediately if you like. Holmes took his coat and put on his hat. As he walked toward the door, he paused and turned around. His eyes scanned the room for a moment. The fireplace, the books, the chemistry sets. Everything was in its place. But something was missing. A challenge, a puzzle. And now, perhaps that puzzle was coming. Come on, Watson, said Holmes. London is waiting for us. As the carriage rolled through the streets of London, Holmes gazed out the window. The city was alive with the bustle of the early morning. Workers headed to factories, vendors carried their wares, children ran through the streets. But Holmes didn't see any of this. His mind had already arrived at the scene, weighing possible scenarios. Rose Delaney, he said to himself, as if thinking aloud. 25 years old, a quiet woman living alone, an editorial assistant, limited social life, no boyfriend. But she has had relationships in the past. Watson looked at his friend. What are you thinking? I'm not thinking yet, said Holmes. I'm observing. It's too early to draw conclusions. But I have some questions in my mind. Why wasn't the door forced? How did the killer get in? Why only one stab wound? And most importantly, why Rose Delaney? Maybe it was a random attack, said Lestrade. Whitechapel isn't a safe area. Holmes shook his head. Random attacks involve theft. Valuables are stolen. You said nothing was missing. No, this wasn't random. The killer targeted Rose Delaney. The question is, why? The car stopped in front of Camden Apartments. The building was typical of Whitechapel, brick-faced, 4 stories high, somewhat neglected but not completely dilapidated. 2 police officers stood guard at the entrance. Holmes got out of the car and examined the building. His eyes scanned the facade, the windows, the balconies, the roof. Then he looked around, the street, the opposite buildings, the nearby shops. Which floor? He asked. Second, said Lestrade. Apartment number 7. Holmes nodded and entered the armed building. As he climbed the stairs, he examined every step, every wall, every detail. Watson and Lestrade followed behind him. When they reached the 2nd floor, a police officer was standing in front of the door to apartment number 7. Holmes glanced at the man and headed towards the door. Has the door been touched? He asked. It was only opened and closed, sir, said the officer. Nothing inside has been touched. Holmes examined the door. He looked closely at the lock. He ran his finger over the lock mechanism. He frowned. Interesting, he said in a low voice. What did you find? Watson asked. Holmes didn't answer. He opened the door and went inside. The apartment was small but tidy. A corridor leading from the entrance hall to the living room, the kitchen on the left, the bedroom on the right. The furniture was simple, but tastefully chosen. There were a few paintings on the walls, books on the shelves. Everything was in its place, just as Lestrade had said. Holmes stopped in the living room and looked around. His eyes scanned every detail. The pattern of the carpet, the objects on the table, the curtain on the window, the chair next to the fireplace. "Watson," he said, "go to the bedroom and examine the body. I'll stay here and look around a bit more." Watson nodded and headed toward the bedroom. Lestrade stayed by Holmes's side. "What are you looking for?" the inspector asked. "An abnormality," said Holmes. "Everything looks very orderly, very normal. But a murder has been committed in this house. Something must be different. And I will find that difference." Holmes walked to the window. He examined the window, which had been left ajar. He looked at the sill, and there he saw something. A muddy footprint. Holmes knelt down and examined the print closely. Small, partially smudged but still visible. He tested the consistency of the mud with his finger. "Lestrade," he said, "when was this print noticed?" "This morning," said Lestrade. "One of the officers saw it. We thought it might be evidence that someone had entered from outside." Holmes stood up and looked out the window. They were on the second floor. Below, the building's rear courtyard was visible. Climbing the wall would be difficult, but not impossible. "This mark isn't fresh," said Holmes. "It's at least a few weeks old. The dried mud and the layer of dust underneath indicate that. It's not connected to the night of the incident." "How can you be sure?" Lestrade asked skeptically. "Look at the composition of the mud," said Holmes. "It contains lime residue. This type of mixture is seen in construction or renovation work. Has there been any renovation work done on the building recently?" Lestrade looked at his notebook. "Yes, 3 weeks ago, roof repair work was done." "There you have it," said Holmes. "This trace belongs to the renovation workers. It has nothing to do with our killer. It's a red herring, that's all." Lestrade sighed in disappointment. "Then how did the killer get in?" Holmes turned to the door. "Through the door, of course, but not by force. Either the door was open or he had a key. I'd say I'm inclined toward the second option." "Why?" "Because," said Holmes, his eyes sparkling, "when I examined the lock, I noticed very light, almost invisible scratches. Freshly made scratches. A key, but not an ordinary key. A duplicate key." At that moment, Watson emerged from the bedroom. His face was pale. "Holmes," he said, "you need to come and look at this." Holmes and Lestrade followed Watson into the bedroom. The body had already been removed, but the blood stain on the floor was still there. Watson was pointing to the small drawer next to the bed. "I found this inside," said Watson, holding a folded piece of paper. "At the bottom of the drawer, among the other papers." Holmes took the paper and unfolded it. There were 2 words written in handwriting on it. "Leave me alone." Holmes studied the writing for a long time. He looked at the quality of the paper, the colour of the ink, the style of the writing. "This note is old," he said. "At least a few months old. The paper is yellowed, the ink faded. And the writing, this isn't Rose's handwriting." "How do you know?" asked Lestrade. Holmes walked over to the desk in the room and picked up the notebook on it. He flipped through the pages and found a sample of writing. "Compare. Rose's writing is round, neat, slanted. The writing on this note is angular, stiff, upright, a different hand. Rose didn't write this note. It was written to Rose." Watson and Lestrade looked at each other. So someone wrote, "Leave me alone," to Rose, Watson said slowly. But that doesn't make sense. If someone wanted to stay away from Rose, why would they kill her? Holmes shook his head. No, Watson. Think the opposite. What if this note is a draft of a note Rose wrote to someone? Or a threatening letter someone wrote to Rose, but she kept hidden? In either case, this note tells us something. There was someone in Rose's life who was bothering her. A persistent person. And perhaps a dangerous one. The room fell silent for a moment. The sounds of horse-drawn carriages outside, the distant cries of vendors, the hum of the city, all seemed to be left behind the walls of this small room. Holmes put the note in his pocket and walked to the window. He looked out at London's foggy streets. "This case," he said slowly, "is much deeper than it appears, Lestrade. It's not a crime of momentary rage. It has a past. It has a story. And I will uncover that story." Watson came over to his friend. "Where will you start?" Holmes turned and smiled. That familiar sharp smile of a hunter on the trail of something. "From the very beginning, Watson. As always. Who was Rose Delaney? How did she live? Who did she know? Who did she love? And most importantly, who wanted her so badly that they were willing to lose her?" Lestrade closed his notebook. "Tomorrow morning, we'll start investigating Rose's workplace and her friends." "Not tomorrow," Holmes said firmly. "Today. Every passing hour, the evidence grows cold, witnesses forget, the killer slips away. Time, Lestrade. Time is everything." And so, in this foggy city at the heart of London, a detective, a doctor, and an inspector stepped into the darkness. Rose Delaney's story was just beginning, and its end would be darker than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 2. Seeing the unseen Holmes spent hours in Rose Delaney's apartment. While Watson and Lestrade watched, the detective systematically examined every corner, every drawer, every shelf. He looked at the fibres of the carpet with his magnifying glass, felt the texture of the walls with his fingertips, and sniffed the air. This ritual might seem strange, even comical to an outside observer. But Watson had long since accepted the genius behind his friend's methods. "Over there in the corner," said Holmes, pointing to a spot in the living room. "There's a slight indentation in the carpet. Someone stood there for a long time. Their weight crushed the carpet fibres and left a mark." Watson looked at the spot indicated. No matter how hard he strained his eyes, he couldn't see anything different. "Are you sure, Holmes? I don't see anything." "You don't see it because you're not looking," Holmes said patiently. "Your eyes are seeing, but your brain isn't processing. Now, bend down and look at the carpet from the side. Pay attention to the angle of the light." Watson did as he was told, and then he saw it. A portion of the carpet fibres lay slightly flatter than the surrounding ones. A tiny, almost imperceptible difference. But it was there. "Incredible," said Watson. "But what does it mean?" Holmes walked over to that spot and stopped. "This is the most strategic point in the room. From here you can see both the door and the entrance to the bedroom. Someone stood here and waited. The question is, what were they waiting for?" "Perhaps Rose," said Lestrade. "They might have entered while she was away and waited for her." "Possible," said Holmes. "But there's another possibility. Maybe Rose was home and the killer was watching her, for a while, before taking action." This thought made the air in the room heavy. Watson imagined the young woman's last moments, at home in the place she thought was safe, unaware she was being watched. It was a chilling thought. Holmes returned to the window. He examined the muddy footprint once more. This time he took a small knife from his pocket and scraped a small sample of mud from the edge of the print. He placed the sample in a small glass vial and put it in his pocket. "I'll analyze this later," he said. "But my initial observation was correct. This mud contains construction debris. It has no connection to the night of the incident." "So the possibility of an outsider entering is completely ruled out?" Lestrade asked. "The possibility of entry through this window is ruled out," Holmes said carefully. "But the killer could still be someone from outside. They just didn't use this window." Holmes closed the window and examined the bolt. "This bolt is easy to open. It can be manipulated from inside or outside, but there are no fresh marks on it. It has been in this position for a long time." The detective left the room and stepped into the hallway. He walked to the door and examined the lock once more. This time. He took his magnifying glass from his pocket and held the lens up to the lock. "Come here," he said to Watson and Lestrade. "I want you to see this." The two men approached. Holmes handed the magnifying glass to Lestrade. "Look at the lock's inner mechanism," he said. "What do you see?" Lestrade looked through the magnifying glass. He was silent for a moment, then frowned. "There are scratches, very small, but they're there. They look new." "Because they are new," said Holmes. "These scratches are marks left by a key unfamiliar with this lock. The original key wouldn't have left these scratches because the lock was made for it. But a copy key, especially a hastily made copy, leaves marks like these." Watson looked at the top of the lock. "So the killer had the key copied." "Absolutely," said Holmes. "And that tells us a lot. First, the murder was premeditated. The killer had found a way into Rose's house beforehand. Second, the killer knew Rose. To have the key copied, they needed access to the original, at least for a short time. Third, the killer was patient. This kind of preparation takes time." Lestrade was taking notes in his notebook. "But the murder looks like a momentary outburst of rage. A single stab wound. Minimal struggle." "That's the paradox," said Holmes, his eyes sparkling. "The preparation was planned, but the action was uncontrolled. This gives us a clue about the killer's psychology. He probably didn't intend to kill at first. He had another purpose, but something went wrong. What he planned didn't happen, and he lost control." "What could he have planned?" Watson asked. Holmes thought for a moment. "Talking, perhaps, persuading or threatening. But killing? No, I don't think so. If he had planned to kill, he would have done a cleaner job. He wouldn't have left evidence. He would have chosen a quiet method. This chaos, this single knife blow. It's a sign of a plan gone wrong." The three men left the apartment and stepped into the hallway. Holmes headed toward the door of the adjacent apartment. "Margaret Hollow," he said, "the neighbour who found the body. I need to speak with her." Lestrade nodded. "We summoned her for questioning this morning. She should be at home." Holmes knocked on the door. A few seconds later, it opened slightly, revealing the face of an elderly woman. She was in her late 50s with grey hair and a round face. The shock of the previous day still lingered in her eyes. "Mrs. Hollow," Holmes said politely. "I'm Sherlock Holmes. These gentlemen are Dr. Watson and Inspector Lestrade. We'd like to speak with you about Rose Delaney. We apologize for disturbing you." A look of recognition appeared on the woman's face. "Sherlock Holmes, the detective from the newspapers?" "The man himself," said Watson, smiling slightly. Mrs. Hollow opened the door completely. Come in, please. Shall I make some tea? I still haven't recovered. Poor Rose. She was such a beautiful, kind girl. The apartment resembled Rose's but was fuller, more lived in. Every corner held a memento, a photograph, a trinket. Mrs. Hollow ushered her guests into the living room and went to the kitchen to prepare tea. Holmes quickly scanned the room while the woman was gone. He looked at the photos on the wall. Mrs. Hollow in her youth, with a man, children, a happy family. Now she seemed to live alone. Mrs. Hollow returned with the tea tray and sat down. Her hands were trembling slightly. "I don't know what I can tell you," she said. "I've already told the police everything." "I know," said Holmes in a soft tone. "But sometimes there are small details we overlook in the first account. Now, could you tell me about last night? In your own words?" Mrs. Hollow took a deep breath. "I was at home around 8 in the evening. I ate dinner, read a little. Around 10 I started hearing noises from the apartment next door. Talking. It wasn't a loud argument, but there was tension. I couldn't make out the words. The walls are thick. I could only hear the tone." "How long did it last?" Holmes asked. "Not long. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. Then I heard a sound, a sharp sound. Then silence." "What was that sharp sound like? Can you describe it?" Mrs. Hollow closed her eyes, trying to remember. "Like a scream, but not quite a scream. Like it was cut off, short and abrupt. Then there was no sound at all." "What did you do then?" "Nothing," said Mrs. Hollow, looking embarrassed. "The sound stopped, and I thought maybe it was coming from the television. Or maybe Rose had a guest and they were arguing. I didn't want to pry into people's private lives. But now, I wish I had done something." Holmes gave the woman a reassuring look. "Don't blame yourself, Mrs. Hollow. Most people would have done the same thing in that situation. So, what happened next?" "Around 11 o'clock, I was getting ready for bed. I opened the door to take out the trash, and as I walked down the hallway, I saw that Rose's door was ajar. That seemed strange. Rose always kept her door locked. I called out, but got no answer. And then I went inside." The woman's voice trembled. Watson went over and took her hand. "You don't need to continue," Watson said gently. "We know what you saw." Mrs. Hollow shook her head and wiped her eyes. "I found her there, on the floor. Her eyes were open. I screamed and ran back. I locked my door and called the police." Holmes remained silent for a moment. Then he asked, "Mrs. Hollow, how long had you known Rose?" 2 years since she moved into this building. We were very good neighbours. We'd have tea together sometimes, chat. Sometimes we'd go shopping together." "Did she ever mention anyone who was bothering her in her life?" Mrs. Hollow paused for a moment. Holmes noted the pause. "A few months ago," the woman said slowly. "Rose seemed a bit troubled. I asked her, and at first she didn't want to say. But then she mentioned an ex-boyfriend. She said he wouldn't leave her alone." Holmes's eyes lit up. "Go on. What exactly did she say?" "She didn't go into much detail. She just said it was a short-lived relationship, that she ended it, but the man wouldn't accept it. He kept sending messages, following her, wouldn't leave her alone." "Did she mention the man's name?" Mrs. Hollow frowned, trying to remember. "She mentioned a name, but I can't recall it. I think it started with an E." "Edward? Edwin? No, it was something else." "Evan?" Holmes asked quietly. The woman's face lit up. "Yes, Evan. That's what it was. Evan. He didn't say his last name, but his name was Evan." Watson and Lestrade looked at each other. Holmes stood up without saying a word and walked to the window. Outside, the midday sun was filtering through the clouds, but the detective's mind was in a much darker place. "Mrs. Hollow," he said, his back turned. "Have you ever seen this Evan?" "A few times," the woman said. "In the hallway, coming in and out of the building. He was a quiet, unassuming man, but there was something about him, in his eyes, something unsettling." "What did he look like?" "Average height, slender build, dark hair, in his mid-20s. His clothes were neat, but unassuming. His face, an ordinary face, the kind that would blend into a crowd." Holmes turned. "When was the last time you saw him?" Mrs. Hollow thought. 3, maybe 4 weeks ago. He was standing in front of the building, looking up at Rose's window. When I came out, he quickly walked away." "Did you tell Rose about this?" "I did." Rose's face went pale. "Is he still around here?" she said. Her voice was trembling. "I suggested we notify the police, but Rose refused." "He won't do anything," she said. "He's just obsessed. He'll give it up eventually." But he didn't give up," said Holmes. "And Rose was wrong." The room fell silent for a moment. Tears were streaming down Mrs. Hollow's cheeks. Watson handed her a handkerchief. Holmes turned to Lestrade. "We need to find Evan. Right away." "We only have a first name," said Lestrade. "Do you know how many Evans there are in London?" "But he had a connection to Rose," said Holmes. "Rose's friends, colleagues, family. Someone must know him. Someone must know his last name." Watson stood up. "Who was Rose's closest friend? Maybe she knows." Mrs. Hollow wiped her nose. Nina Calder, Rose's best friend. They worked together at the publishing house. Rose often talked about her." Holmes took note. "Address?" "I don't know," said Mrs. Hollow. "But I know the address of the publishing house, where Rose worked, Mercer and Sons Publishing, on Fleet Street." Holmes took his hat. "Mrs. Hollow, you've been very helpful. If you remember anything else, please let Inspector Lestrade know." The woman nodded. "For Rose. Do whatever you can for whoever finds her. She didn't deserve this." Holmes stood at the door and looked at the woman. There was a rare softness in his eyes. "I'll find her," he said. "I promise." When they stepped out onto the street, Holmes began walking quickly. Watson and Lestrade struggled to keep up. "Where are we going?" Watson asked, out of breath. "Fleet Street," said Holmes. "Mercer and Sons Publishing. We need to speak with Nina Calder." "But shouldn't we investigate Evan first?" said Lestrade. "We can look at police records, stalking complaints." Holmes paused and turned to Lestrade. "Rose didn't file a police report. Mrs. Hollow said so you won't find anything in the official records. But Nina Calder, Rose's closest friend, that's different. She knows Rose's secrets. Evan's last name, his address, everything." Lestrade nodded. "Makes sense. Let's go." They hired a horse-drawn carriage and set off for Fleet Street. As the carriage moved forward, Holmes was silent, his eyes fixed on the window. But he saw nothing. His mind was trying to piece together the puzzle. "Holmes," Watson said, breaking the silence. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Holmes said slowly, "that this case is much darker than it appears. Evan, whoever he is, has been following Rose for months. He had a key copied. He found a way into her house. This isn't a simple obsession, Watson. This is an obsession. A dangerous obsession. But why kill her, if he wanted her so badly?" "That's precisely why," said Holmes. "He wanted her but couldn't have her. He wanted to control her but couldn't. And that night, whatever happened, Rose rejected him one last time, and Evan snapped. Watson shuddered. Horrible. The human mind, Watson, is the most complex and dangerous mechanism in the universe. Love can turn to hate, passion to destruction, and obsession to death. The car stopped on Fleet Street. Mercer and Sons Publishing was a 3-story brick building. The company's name was written in gold letters above the entrance. Holmes got out of the car and looked at the building. "Let's go inside," he said, "and see what Nina Calder has to tell us." When they entered the building, they encountered a reception desk. A young woman was sitting behind it. Holmes approached. "Good day," he said. "We'd like to speak with Nina Calder. It's about Rose Delaney." The woman's face paled. "Rose? Yes, we heard. It's terrible. Everyone is in shock. Is Nina here?" "Yes, she's upstairs, but she's not doing well today. She was very shaken when she heard about Rose's death." Holmes nodded sympathetically. "I understand, but this is very important. We just need to speak with her for a few minutes." The woman hesitated, but then nodded. "Second floor, editorial department. You can find her there." They climbed the stairs and reached the second floor. It was an open office space, desks, books, piles of paper. In the corner, by the window, they saw a young woman sitting alone. Her eyes were red, and she held a crumpled handkerchief in her hand. Holmes approached. "Nina Calder?" The woman lifted her head. She was about 26 years old, with auburn hair and a slender face. She should have been beautiful, but her face was now etched with sorrow. "Yes," she said in a hoarse voice. "Who are you?" "Sherlock Holmes. This is Dr. Watson and Inspector Lestrade. We want to talk to you about Rose." Nina's eyes widened. "Sherlock Holmes? Really?" "Yes, we need your help to solve the case." Nina nodded and gestured to the empty chairs beside her. "Sit down. I'll do everything I can to help you. Rose, she was my best friend. I still can't believe it." Holmes sat down and looked at the woman. "I understand you perfectly, Miss Calder, and I apologize for disturbing you at this difficult time. But we need to find justice for Rose, and for that, we need your information." Nina wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. "What do you want to know?" "Tell us about Rose's ex-boyfriend, Evan." Nina's face changed. Grief gave way to anger for a moment. "Evan Cross," she said, spitting out the name. "That bastard." Holmes leaned forward. "Tell us everything you know about him." Chapter 3. The Man in the Shadows. Nina Calder took a deep breath and looked out the window. London's foggy skies seemed to mirror her inner world. Then she began to speak. "Rose and I had been friends for 3 years," she said. "We met here at the publishing house. She was an editorial assistant and so was I. We hit it off immediately. We liked the same books, laughed at the same things. We became best friends in no time." Holmes listened patiently. Watson took notes. Lestrade stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the window. "Evan Cross," Holmes said gently. "How did Rose meet him?" Nina's face tensed. 8 months ago, at a book fair, Evan worked for a printing company. Their booths were next to each other. They started talking. Rose found him attractive at first. He seemed quiet, thoughtful, intellectual. Everything was fine for the first few weeks. Then what changed? Evan changed. Or maybe he just showed his true colours, I don't know. At first he was just attentive. He was always calling Rose, texting her, asking where she was. Rose found it romantic at first, but then it started to feel intrusive. Watson lifted his pen. What kind of things was he doing? Nina sighed. Everything. He'd wait for her when she got off work. He'd come to her house without asking. He'd interrogate Rose's friends, who she'd seen, where she'd gone, what she'd done. He'd have panic attacks if she didn't reply to his messages right away. He'd get angry when Rose talked to other men. What did Rose do? She tried to end the relationship, but Evan wouldn't accept it. Every time she tried to end it, he cried, begged, promised to change. Rose softened a few times. She gave him chances, but nothing changed. Finally, 4 months ago, Rose ended the relationship for good. She told Evan she didn't want any more contact with him. Holmes leaned forward. And did Evan accept that? Nina laughed bitterly. Accepted? It got worse. After the breakup, his obsession peaked. He waited for hours outside Rose's house. He sent flowers and letters to her workplace. He constantly called Rose's phone. She blocked him, so he called from new numbers. Rose changed her address, and Evan found her new address. How did he find it? We don't know. Rose had been very careful. She only shared her new address with a few people, but Evan found out somehow. Maybe he followed her. Maybe he found another way. Anyway, within a month, he showed up in front of Rose's new house. Watson shook her head in horror. This man is sick. Yes, said Nina. Rose thought so too, but she didn't want to go to the police. I have no proof, she said. He's just waiting, just watching. They won't call that a crime. She was also afraid of Evan's reaction. She was sure that if she went to the police, Evan would become even more dangerous. Holmes stood up and began pacing the room. The pieces were falling into place in his mind. Miss Calder, did Rose ever mention any notes that said, "Leave me alone"? Nina's eyes widened. How did you know? We found a note in Rose's drawer. It said that. Nina nodded. Yes. Rose wrote to Evan many times. Letters, notes. Leave me alone. Get out of my life. Don't contact me again. But Evan ignored them. He even sent some back to Rose, adding his own notes. What kind of notes? Nina shuddered. Disturbing things. You're mine. I'll never give up. We'll be together, whether you want to or not. Rose showed them to me. Her eyes were filled with tears. This man is going to kill me, she said once. I thought she was joking. A heavy silence fell over the room. Nina's last words hung in the air. Rose's prophecy had come true. Holmes walked to the window and looked out. Below, the crowds of Fleet Street flowed by. Everyone was preoccupied with their own lives, struggling with their own troubles, and Rose Delaney had quietly disappeared into that crowd. What else do you know about Evan Cross? Holmes asked, his back turned. His family, his address, where he works, Nina thought. I don't know much about his family. Rose said Evan didn't talk about his family much. I guess he didn't get along with them. Where he worked, Whitmore Printing, a printing company. But I heard he left after Rose left. I don't know where he works now. What about his address? I don't know, but Rose once mentioned that Evan was staying at a cheap boarding house. She didn't say where. Holmes turned. Can you describe Evan's physical appearance? Nina closed her eyes and tried to remember. Average height, maybe 5'9", slim build, even thin. Dark brown hair, cut short, his face ordinary, no sharp features, nothing striking. His eyes were dark, brown or black. He always dressed neatly, but not flashily. Grey, brown tones. The kind of person who would blend into a crowd. Any distinguishing features? Scars, moles, tattoos? Not that I recall, but there was something... His gaze. Rose had mentioned it. Evan's gaze could be intensely unsettling, especially when he looked at Rose. It was as if he wanted to devour her. Watson reviewed his notes. When was the last time you saw Evan? Nina thought. About a month ago. Rose and I were having a lunch at a nearby cafe. I looked outside and saw him. He was standing across the street, watching us. I told Rose, and she saw him too. Her face went pale. It's him again, she said. He keeps showing up everywhere. A few minutes later, Evan was gone. But Rose was upset. We left lunch halfway through. Holmes approached the table and sat down across from Nina. He looked into her eyes. Miss Calder, I'm going to ask you a very important question, and I need your honest answer. Nina nodded. Of course. Was there anyone else besides Evan who was bothering or threatening Rose? Any enemies? Old friends? Co-workers? Nina thought. A long moment passed. No, she said finally. Rose was loved by everyone. She was quiet, kind, helpful. I can't think of anyone who would have a reason to want to hurt her. Only Evan. Holmes stood up. Thank you, Miss Calder. You've been very helpful. Nina also stood up. Her eyes were filled with tears. Mr. Holmes, Rose was my best friend. I loved her very much. Please find her killer. The person who caused her pain must be punished. Holmes gently touched the woman's hand. I will find him, Miss Calder. I promise you. As they left the publishing house, Holmes began walking quickly. Watson and Lestrade were running after him. Where are we going now? Lestrade asked, out of breath. We're going back to Rose's apartment, said Holmes. There should be more evidence there, especially those notes. Nina said Rose wrote many notes and Evan sent some back. Maybe they're still there. They hailed a cab and returned to Whitechapel. By the time they reached Camden Apartments, the sun had already begun to set. The sky was tinged with shades of orange and purple. When they entered Rose's apartment, Holmes headed straight for the bedroom. He opened the drawer and began carefully removing its contents. Papers, notebooks, envelopes. Watson, bring that box over here, Holmes said, pointing to a cardboard box in the corner. There might be other things inside. Watson brought the box. Inside were old photographs, tickets, small mementos, and at the bottom, a stack of letters. Holmes took the letters and began examining them. Some were in Rose's handwriting, others in someone else's. He looked at the addresses on the envelopes. Here, said Holmes, holding up a letter. This must be Evan's handwriting. Look at the address on the envelope. Lestrade took the envelope. There was an address written on it. 14 Grimsby Lane, Whitechapel. Is that his address? Lestrade asked excitedly. Probably his old address, said Holmes. Nina said Evan was staying at a boarding house. This could be a boarding house address. Holmes opened the letter and read it. His face hardened. What does it say? Watson asked. Holmes handed the letter to Watson. Watson began reading. Rose, why aren't you answering? Why are you ignoring me? I can't live without you. You're my everything. We need to be together. It's inevitable. I know you're afraid. I know you're hesitating. But these feelings will pass. In time, you'll understand that I'm the best choice for you. No one else can love you as much as I do. Please open the door. Please talk to me. If you don't, I don't know what I'll do. I can't imagine a life without you. Forever with you, Evan. Watson lowered the letter. His face was pale. This is unsettling. And this is just one of them, said Holmes. There are at least 10 more here. Holmes began examining the other letters. Each one was similar in tone. Pleading, threatening, obsessive. Evan's mental state was clearly evident in these letters. The tone, romantic and pleading at first, had become darker and more threatening over time. The last letter was different from the others. The date was just 2 weeks before Rose's death. "Rose, my patience is running out. I gave you a chance. I gave you time, but you still reject me. This cannot go on. We will be together. This is not an option, it is a fact. If you refuse to be with me, you cannot be with anyone else. We'll meet soon. E." Holmes placed the letter on the table. "Here's the murder threat, black and white." Lestrade picked up the letter. "Is this enough for court?" "Not on its own," said Holmes, "but combined with the other evidence, it will be enough to convict Evan Cross. But first, we have to find him." Watson continued rummaging through the drawer and found something, a small, leather-bound notebook. "Holmes, look at this," he said. Holmes took the notebook and opened it. It was in Rose's handwriting. It was a diary. He began turning the pages. The diary dated back about 6 months. Rose wrote about her daily life, her work, her friends. But at a certain point, the entries began to change. March 15th. Evan called again. From a blocked number, hearing his voice made my heart race. When will he give up? March 22nd. I saw him today when I left work. He was standing across the street. He was watching me. He followed me all the way home. I locked my door and couldn't sleep all night. April 3rd. Another letter arrived, the same as always. "I will be with you. It's inevitable. This man is sick. But what good would it do to go to the police? I have nothing concrete, just letters and stalking. They'll say, it's not a crime." April 18th. I told Nina everything. She's scared for me too. "Change your address," she said. Maybe she's right. Maybe I should run away. May 2. I moved into the new apartment. I hope Evan can't find me, but I have a feeling this isn't over. May 20th. He found me. I don't know how, but he did. I saw him today in front of my new home. The same look, the same silence, as if I were a ghost. June 5th. Now I have nightmares every night. I jump at every doorbell. I look for him in every shadow. This isn't life. This is a prison. June 15th. Maybe I should talk to him. Maybe if I meet him face to face, I can explain. Maybe then he'll give up. Or maybe it'll get worse. I don't know anymore. I don't know anything. The diary ended on this date. The following pages were blank. Holmes closed the notebook and took a deep breath. Rose Delaney, a month before her death, was thinking about meeting him face to face. Maybe she did meet him, and that meeting was her last. Watson looked at his friend. Poor woman. She lived with this nightmare for months. "And no one could help her," said Holmes, with a rare edge of anger in his voice. "The system should have protected her. The police, the laws, society. But none of them could protect Rose from Evan Cross." Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. "Holmes, you know we're doing everything we can. But the laws are inadequate, Lestrade," Holmes said sternly. "Rose asked for help repeatedly. She showed letters, described the stalking, but she was turned away with no concrete crime. And now she's dead. This is the failure of the system." The room fell into a heavy silence. Holmes' words had struck a chord with everyone present. Finally, Holmes picked up his hat. "We've wasted enough time. Now we need to find Evan Cross. Grimsby Lane, number 14. That's where we'll start." Grimsby Lane was one of Whitechapel's darkest corners. A narrow, dirty street with dilapidated buildings on both sides. Gas lamps barely illuminated the way. Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade stopped in front of number 14. The building was an old, 3-story structure. Its facade was cracked, its windows dirty, its door half open. A rusted sign next to the entrance indicated it was a boarding house. Mrs. Pemberton's boarding house. Holmes pushed the door open and stepped inside. A dim corridor, the smell of mould and dampness. A door on the left, with manager written on it. Holmes knocked on the door. A raspy voice came from inside. "Come in." When they entered, they encountered an elderly woman, in her 60s, overweight with grey hair. She was sitting behind a desk, a glass of gin in front of her. "What do you want?" the woman asked, narrowing her eyes. "Mrs. Pemberton," said Holmes. "I'm Sherlock Holmes. These gentlemen are Dr. Watson and Inspector Lestrade. We'd like some information about one of your tenants." The woman's eyes fixed on Lestrade's police badge. A look of unease crossed her face. "Who are we talking about?" "Evan Cross. He was staying here." Mrs. Pemberton's face changed. "Evan?" "Yes, he was staying here, but he's not here anymore." "When did he leave?" "About 3 weeks ago. Suddenly. One morning I woke up and he was gone. He didn't even pay his rent, the scoundrel." Holmes leaned forward. "Do you know where he went?" "No, he didn't say anything. He packed his things and left." "What was he like while he was staying here?" Mrs. Pemberton shrugged. "Quiet. He didn't talk to anyone. He rarely left his room. But sometimes he did strange things." "Like what?" "He would go out late at night. He would return in the early hours of the morning, and he would write things in his room for hours. Once his door was ajar, and I looked inside. He had papers stuck to the walls, photographs, notes, maps. There was a photograph of a woman in the middle, a beautiful young woman. And around it, notes tied with red strings." Holmes and Watson looked at each other. This was concrete evidence of obsession. "Do you know who that woman is?" Holmes asked. "No, I didn't ask. I don't meddle in others' affairs." Holmes stood up. "Mrs. Pemberton, can we see Evan's room?" The woman hesitated. "The room is empty now. I haven't found a new tenant yet." "Please, this is very important." Mrs. Pemberton sighed and got up. "All right, but hurry." The woman led them upstairs and stopped in front of a door. She unlocked it with a key. The room was small and dark. A single window with dirty glass, a bed, a table, a chair, and on the walls, nothing. The papers, the photographs, all gone. Holmes began examining the room. The marks where the papers had been stuck to the walls were still visible. On the table, a few pinholes. "He took everything with him," said Holmes, "but some traces remain." Holmes bent down and looked under the carpet. He saw something. He reached out and pulled it out. A small photograph, crumpled, torn but still visible. Rose Delaney's face. Holmes put the photograph in his pocket. "Evan Cross lived here. He followed Rose from here. And 3 weeks ago, when he was ready to commit murder, he disappeared." "Where could he be now?" Watson asked. Holmes looked out the window. London's dark streets stretched out like an endless labyrinth. "Somewhere," he said. "He's hiding, but he can't hide forever. I'll find him, Watson, no matter the cost." Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. The next morning, the flat on Baker Street was bustling early. Holmes had not slept all night. On his desk lay Rose's diary, Evan's letters, and the photograph Mrs. had taken from Pemberton's boarding house. The detective had examined these documents over and over, committing every word, every detail to memory. When Watson climbed the stairs and entered the room, he found Holmes standing by the window. His friend, holding a pipe, was looking out at the misty street below. "Didn't you sleep?" Watson asked, placing the breakfast tray on the table. "Sleep is the enemy of the mind, Watson," said Holmes, turning around. There were slight circles under his eyes, but his gaze was as sharp as ever. "At least in a case like this. Every closed eye means a missed detail." Watson poured his tea and handed his friend a cup. "Did you find anything?" Holmes walked over to the table and picked up the diary. "I've read Rose's diary at least 10 times. I've analysed every word, and some things caught my attention." "What kind of things?" Holmes opened to a specific page. Here, the entry dated April 18th. Rose writes that she told Nina everything, but pay attention to this sentence. "I told Nina everything. She's scared for me too." But she said something else, about Evan's past, that he might have done things like this before. Watson raised his eyebrows. Evan's past. Nina didn't mention that to us. "Because we didn't ask," said Holmes. "More accurately, we didn't ask the right question. We asked Nina what Evan did to Rose, but we didn't ask about Evan's life before Rose. So Evan might have stalked someone before? Possible. This kind of obsessive behavior rarely appears for the first time. There's usually a pattern, a past. And if there are similar incidents in Evan's past, that could give us new clues to find him." Watson sipped his tea thoughtfully. "We need to talk to Nina again." "Yes, but first we need to go somewhere else." Holmes pulled a telegram from his pocket. "Last night, I sent a telegram to Rose's father, Arthur Delaney. The reply came this morning. He agrees to meet with us." "Rose's father? Where does he live?" "Richmond, outside London, but not too far. Less than an hour by train." Watson stood up. "Then let's go." Richmond was a small, quiet town on the banks of the Thames River, southwest of London. It was a place far from the city's noise and crowds, filled with green gardens and elegant houses. When Holmes and Watson got off at the train station, they breathed in the fresh air. Arthur Delaney's house was located on a small hill, a little way from the town's centre. It was a charming, 2-story, whitewashed house, covered in ivy. Flowers bloomed in the garden, but an invisible cloud of sorrow seemed to hang over the house. Holmes knocked on the door. A few seconds later, the door opened and an old man appeared. He was about 55 years old, with grey hair and a weary face. His eyes were red. It was clear he had been crying a lot in recent days. "Mr. Holmes," the man said in a hoarse voice. "I'm Arthur Delaney. Thank you for coming." Holmes bowed his head. "Mr. Delaney, my condolences. I'm very sorry about your daughter." Arthur nodded and invited them inside. The house was as warm and welcoming as it appeared from the outside. Family photos on the walls, books on the shelves, an old rocking chair by the fireplace, and everywhere traces of Rose. Childhood photos, school diplomas, drawings she had made. Arthur led them into the living room and gestured for them to sit down. He sat across from them, his hands on his knees, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Rose," he said slowly, "was my only child. My wife died 5 years ago. Cancer. Since then there was only Rose. And now she's gone too." Watson looked at the man with sympathetic eyes. "Mr. Delaney, we know you're going through a very difficult time, but we need your help to find your daughter's killer." Arthur raised his head. Alongside the grief, a glimmer of determination shone in his eyes. "I'll tell you everything. For Rose. Whoever caused her pain must pay." Holmes leaned forward. Mr. Delaney, did you know your daughter had a relationship with someone named Evan Cross? Arthur's face darkened. The moment he heard the name, his expression changed. Yes, he said in a harsh voice. I knew. I never liked that man. That man. Why? Arthur took a deep breath. Rose told me about Evan when she met him. She was excited, happy. Dad, I found a great guy, she said. Of course I was happy too. I wanted my daughter to be happy, but then I met Evan. What happened? One weekend, Rose brought him here. We ate, we talked. Evan was polite, he spoke kindly. But there was something about him. Something wrong. His gaze, the way he looked at Rose. It was as if he was watching her. Every move she made, every word she said. It wasn't a normal gaze. It was a possessive gaze. Holmes nodded. Go on. After that night, I told Rose. There's something strange about this guy, I said. Be careful. Rose laughed. Dad, you're too protective, she said. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being overly anxious. But later it turned out I was right. Did Rose tell you the relationship had broken down? Arthur shook his head. A few months later, she called, crying. I broke up with Evan, she said, but he won't accept it. He keeps calling, stalking me. I told her to go to the police, but Rose didn't want to. I have no proof, she said. He's just waiting, just watching. She kept repeating the same things. Watson was taking notes. Did Rose tell you anything about Evan's past? Whether he'd behaved like this before, Arthur thought. Once, yes. Rose told me something she heard from Nina. Evan had been with another woman before Rose, and that woman had gone through similar things. Holmes's eyes lit up. Who is this woman? Do you know her name? No, Rose didn't say. Maybe she didn't know. But she said this. A friend of Nina's knew Evan. It's an old story. Evan stalked that woman too, but she moved away from London. She escaped. Rose was very scared when she heard this story. Holmes stood up and began pacing the room. The pieces were falling into place. Evan Cross was a serial stalker. Rose wasn't his first victim, and she might not be his last if he wasn't stopped. Mr. Delaney, Holmes said, did Rose tell you where Evan was from, who his family was? Arthur frowned. Evan's family. Rose mentioned something. She said Evan didn't get along with his family. His father was dead and he didn't see his mother. He grew up somewhere, up north, Manchester or Liverpool, I don't remember. Anything else? Any details? Arthur thought. A long moment passed. Then his eyes lit up. There was one more thing. Rose mentioned a notebook of Evan's. Evan always carried a notebook with him. He wrote notes in it. Rose saw the notebook once, but Evan hid it immediately. What are you writing? Rose asked. Evan said, my thoughts. But Rose found the notebook very strange. It was as if he was writing everything about someone, she said. Holmes paused. A notebook, thoughts, or rather, obsessions. Watson looked at his friend. Mrs. Pemberton said something similar, that Evan spent hours writing in his room. Yes, said Holmes. Evan Cross is recording his obsessions, every detail, every observation, every thought. This notebook could lead us to him. Because people like that never part with their notebooks. They are like sacred objects to them. Arthur stood up. Tears welled up in his eyes. Mr. Holmes, you can't bring my daughter back. I know that. But please find that man. If Rose's spirit can't find peace, at least let justice be served. Holmes shook the man's hand. I'll find it, Mr. Delaney. I promise you. When they returned to London, Holmes went straight to Mercer and Sons Publishing. He needed to see Nina Calder. again. Nina seemed calmer this time. Her eyes were still red, but she had composed herself. She stood up when she saw Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, welcome back. Any new developments?" "A few more questions, Miss Calder," said Holmes. "I found something interesting in Rose's diary. You mentioned something to her about Evan's past, about him having done similar things before." Nina's face paled. Yes, I did. Tell me everything." Nina took a deep breath and sat down. Holmes sat across from her. "When Rose's relationship with Evan started to get serious," Nina said, "I did some research. You know, friends look out for each other. I asked around among my acquaintances about Evan, and a friend of mine, someone who used to know Evan, said something." "What did they say?" "Her name is Clara Whitmore. She had a brief relationship with Evan 2 years ago, and Clara went through the same thing. Stalking, persistence, threats. Evan wouldn't leave Clara alone for months. Eventually, Clara had to move in with her family. To Brighton. She fled London." Holmes asked excitedly, "Where is Clara Whitmore now?" "She's still living in Brighton as far as I know, but I haven't seen her in years." "Do you have an address?" Nina thought for a moment. "No, but I know where she works. She was working at a library, the Brighton Public Library." Holmes jumped to his feet. "Thank you, Miss Calder. You've been very helpful." Nina asked anxiously, "Will you find Evan?" Holmes turned at the door. "Yes, and this time he won't get away." That night, Holmes and Watson were evaluating the information they had gathered at Baker Street. Maps, notes, and documents were spread out on the table. "Evan Cross," said Holmes, "is a serial stalker. Rose is the second victim we know of. Clara Whitmore was the first, and there may be others." "We need to talk to Clara," said Watson. "She might know more about Evan." "We'll go to Brighton tomorrow," said Holmes. "But tonight we need to do something else." "What?" Holmes showed him the map. "We need to narrow down the places where Evan could be hiding. He left the boarding house in Whitechapel, but he hasn't left London. I know that." "How do you know?" "Because he was still following Rose," said Holmes. "Until the night of the murder. If he had left London, he couldn't have done that. So he's still around here somewhere. Another boarding house, maybe a hotel, maybe a friend's place." Watson looked at the map. "There are hundreds of boarding houses in London." "Yes, but Evan has specific preferences. Cheap places, places where no one asks questions, and places close to Rose's home, around Whitechapel." Holmes drew a circle on the map. "In this area, there are at least 20 boarding houses that fit Evan's profile. Tomorrow, Lestrade's men will check them out." Watson sighed. "This will take a long time." "Perhaps," said Holmes, "but Clara Whitmore might show us a shortcut. She knows Evan's habits, his preferences, his hiding patterns. He ran away 2 years ago too, remember? Clara might know how he disappeared." Watson stood up and stretched. "Then we'll need to get up early tomorrow." Holmes walked to the window and looked outside. London's night sky was covered with clouds. The moon occasionally peeked through the clouds. "Rose Delaney," Holmes said quietly, "asked for help, and no one heard her. Clara Whitmore escaped and survived. But Evan is still there, he's still waiting, and if we don't stop him, who will be the next victim?" Watson came over to his friend. "We'll stop him, Holmes. We have to stop him." Holmes turned and looked at Watson. There was a rare determination in his eyes. "Yes, Watson, we will stop him. But we're racing against time, and time waits for no one." Chapter 5. In Pursuit of the Key. Brighton was a seaside resort town south of London. This place, which was packed with tourists in the summer, had taken on a quieter, more melancholic atmosphere in the fall. The wind blowing in from the sea was salty and cool. The cries of the seagulls mingled with the roar of the waves. Holmes and Watson had boarded the train early in the morning and arrived in Brighton around noon. As they stepped out of the station, Watson took a deep breath. "After London's smog, this air feels incredible," he said. Holmes looked around. "The weather may be fine, Watson, but we didn't come here on vacation. Let's find out where the Brighton Public Library is." They asked a street vendor for directions. The library was in the centre of town, in an old stone building. Gothic windows, ivy-covered walls, heavy oak doors. When they entered, they were greeted by the smell of books and old paper. A young man was sitting at the reception desk. Holmes approached him. "Good day. We'd like to speak with Clara Whitmore. She must work here." The young man eyed them suspiciously. "Who are you?" "Sherlock Holmes. This is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We need to speak with Miss Whitmore about a private matter." The young man's eyes widened. "Sherlock Holmes? The detective from the newspaper?" "The man himself." The man jumped up excitedly. Of course. Miss Whitmore works in the archives. I'll take you there." They passed through a narrow corridor and arrived at a room at the back of the building. The archive section was filled with shelves reaching up to the ceiling. Old books, newspapers, documents. And between the shelves, a woman sitting at a desk. Clara Whitmore was in her early 30s, slender, with pale skin. Her light brown hair was tied in a bun at the nape of her neck. Her eyes were scanning a document. She looked up when she saw Holmes. "Yes, can I help you?" Holmes approached and bowed slightly. "Miss Whitmore, I am Sherlock Holmes. This is Dr. Watson. We wish to speak with you about Evan Cross." The moment she heard the name, Clara's face turned pale. The document in her hand fell onto the table. A sudden fear appeared in her eyes. "Evan," she whispered. I haven't heard that name in a long time." "I know, Miss Whitmore, and I apologize for disturbing you, but this is very important. Evan Cross committed a murder a few days ago, and I need to find him." Clara's hands began to tremble. "Murder? Who did he kill?" Her name was Rose Delaney, a young woman, Evan's ex-girlfriend. Clara closed her eyes. She was silent for a moment. Then she took a deep breath and opened her eyes. In them, besides fear, there was something else. Acceptance. "I knew it," she said slowly. "I knew this day would come. Evan, he couldn't control himself. I was lucky. I got away. But the next one might not be so lucky." Holmes sat down across from her. "Miss Whitmore, I want you to tell me everything about Evan. Your relationship with him, how he behaved, how you escaped. Every detail is important." Clara nodded and began to speak. "I met Evan 3 years ago," said Clara. "In a bookstore. I was organising the shelves. He was looking for a book. We started talking. He seemed polite, kind, thoughtful. Our first date went well. So did the second and the third. And I fell in love with him." "When did he change?" Clara laughed bitterly. "He didn't change, Mr. Holmes. I just couldn't see the truth. The warning signs were there from the start. Constantly asking where I was, questioning my friends, panicking if I didn't answer my phone. But I mistook that for interest. He cares, that's why he's curious, I told myself. How foolish I was. How long did the relationship last? 4 months, but the last 2 months were hell. Evan became increasingly controlling. He told me what to wear. He decided who I could see. Once he yelled at me for talking to a male colleague. His eyes changed in those moments. He turned into someone I didn't recognize. Watson was taking notes. Was there any physical violence? Clara shook her head. No, he never hit me. But there were threats. There were insinuations. I can't live without you, he would say. If you leave me, I don't know what I'll do. I never knew if that was a threat or if he was implying suicide. But either way, he was using it to control me. Holmes leaned forward. How did you end the relationship? It was hard, very hard. When I told him, he begged at first. He cried. He promised to change. I didn't accept it. Then he got angry. He yelled. He threatened. You can't leave me, he said. You're mine. That night, he came to my house, pounding on my door. I called the police, but he was gone by the time they arrived. What happened next? Clara looked out the window. The sea shimmered in the distance. It went on for months. Stalking, letters, phone calls. He was everywhere, at work, at home, where I shopped. It was as if he knew my every move. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I quit my job, sold my apartment, and moved to Brighton. My family is here. I got away and he stopped. He left, just like that? Clara turned and looked at Holmes. After a while, yes. Maybe he found someone else. Maybe the distance deterred him. I don't know. But about 6 months later, the letters stopped. The phone calls stopped. And I was able to breathe again. Holmes ran his fingers thoughtfully along his chin. Miss Whitmore, I need to ask you a few specific questions about Evan, about his habits, his preferences. Of course, I'll do my best to help. Where did Evan stay? A house or a boarding house? A boarding house. He always stayed in cheap boarding houses. He spent most of his money, I don't know what on. Maybe on things he used for surveillance. But he always lived in the cheapest places. Did he prefer a particular neighborhood or area? Clara thought. Places close to the center, but not too crowded. Quiet, inconspicuous places, and always places with an escape route. Buildings with back doors, places opening onto side streets, as if he was always ready to run. Holmes took notes. Did he have any other unusual habits? His notebook, Clara said immediately. He always carried a notebook. Small, black, leather-bound. He was always writing something in it. He never showed me what he wrote. Once I asked him, "My thoughts?" he said. But his eyes said something else. And, Clara added, tea. Evan drank a lot of tea, but only a certain brand, Earl Grey. He would look for it everywhere. He would even brew his own tea in boarding houses. Watson raised his eyebrows. This detail seemed insignificant, but he saw Holmes's eyes light up. The detective never considered any detail insignificant. "One last question, Miss Whitmore," said Holmes. "How did Evan get into your house? You kept your door locked, didn't you?" Clara's face darkened. Yes, it was always locked. But Evan somehow got in. I would notice my things had been moved. Once I found a note on my bed. It said, "I'm watching you." My door was locked. The windows were closed. I never understood how he got in. Holmes stood up. Could he have made a copy of the key? Clara's eyes widened. I never thought of that, but it's possible. Evan borrowed my keys once. Just for a few hours, he said he needed to give them to the janitor. Then he gave them back. I didn't suspect anything at the time, but he could have had it copied during those few hours, said Holmes, and come in and out of your house without you knowing. Clara covered her face with her hands. Oh my God, all that time, he was wandering around my house, watching me, and I had no idea. Holmes gently touched the woman's shoulder. Miss Whitmore, you've been very helpful. This information is critical to finding Evan. Clara lowered her hands. Her eyes were moist. Mr. Holmes, that woman, Rose, I feel so sorry for her. I escaped. She couldn't. This is unfair. Justice may be delayed, Holmes said, but it will come. Evan Cross will pay for what he did. I promise you that. When they returned to London, evening was approaching. Holmes was silent in the car, lost in thought. Watson watched his friend. "What are you thinking?" he finally asked. "The key," said Holmes. Both Clara and Rose experienced the same thing. Evans somehow got their keys and had copies made. That's his method, and that's a clue to finding him. How? He had to go to a locksmith to have the keys copied. We need to find the locksmiths around Rose's house. Someone might remember Evan. Watson narrowed his eyes. How many locksmiths do you think there are in Whitechapel? Not many. Most of them do big jobs, shops, offices. Customers who get house keys copied are rare, and Evan's appearance is striking, faded, quiet, nervous. Someone will remember him. When they arrived at Baker Street, Lestrade was waiting for them. The inspector looked excited. "Holmes, I have news." "I have something to tell you too, Lestrade, but you tell me first." "My men have started searching the boarding houses in Whitechapel. We haven't found Evan yet, but we did discover something. A locksmith near Rose's house described a suspicious customer a few weeks ago." Holmes's eyes lit up. "What's the locksmith's name?" "Daniel Voss. His shop is 3 streets away from Rose's building." Holmes took his hat. "We're going right now." Daniel Voss's locksmith shop was a small place, squeezed between 2 buildings on a narrow street. Its window displayed rusty locks, keys and tools. The sign above the door read, "Voss and Sons, Locksmith," in half-faded letters. Holmes pushed the door open and stepped inside. The shop smelled of metal and oil. Behind the counter stood a man in his 40s with bushy eyebrows and strong hands. He was repairing a lock. "Mr. Voss?" Holmes asked. The man looked up. "Yes, that's me. What do you want?" "Sherlock Holmes. This is Dr. Watson and Inspector Lestrade. We'd like to ask you about a customer who came to you a few weeks ago." Voss frowned. "The police? What happened?" Lestrade stepped forward. "A murder investigation, Mr. Voss. A woman was killed in a nearby apartment, and we believe the killer had a key copied from you." Voss's face turned serious. "Murder? Good heavens, which woman?" "Rose Delaney. She lived at Camden Apartments." Voss nodded. I heard. Terrible thing. But how can I help?" Holmes approached the counter. "Mr. Voss, do you remember any male customers who came in to have an apartment key copied in the last month?" Voss thought. "I don't have many customers, Mr. Holmes. Most are regulars, but yes, a man came in a few weeks ago. I remember him because he was strange." Holmes leaned forward. "Tell me." "He was of medium height, thin build, dark hair, very quiet, very nervous. His eyes were constantly scanning the room, as if he were being followed. He wanted to have an apartment key copied. Just one key." "Did he give his name?" "No, I asked, but he didn't want to say." "Just make a copy," he said. He was in a hurry. "How would you describe the key?" Voss opened a drawer and took out a mould. "A standard apartment lock key, Yale type, the kind used in buildings like Camden Apartments." Holmes looked at the mould. Did you keep the mould of the key you copied? No, I threw it away, but I remember the shape of the key and the man's face. It's hard to forget those eyes, as if there was a fire burning inside him. Under control, but there. When did the man come? Do you remember the exact date? Voss opened his notebook and flipped through the pages. Here. Yes, October 15th, 3 weeks ago. Holmes looked at Watson. Exactly 10 days before Rose's death. Lestrade took notes. Mr. Voss, could you recognize this man again? Absolutely. I won't forget that face. Holmes took out the photograph he had obtained from Mrs. Pemberton's boarding house. Rose's photograph. Do you recognize this woman? Voss looked at the photo and shook his head. No, I've never seen her before. Did the man say anything while having the key copied? Why he needed it? For whom? Voss thought. He actually said something. As he handed over the money, he muttered to himself. He can't escape this time, he said. Very quietly, but I heard him. A heavy silence fell over the room. He won't get away this time. Evan's words made his intentions clear. This was a planned action, calculated, and it had inevitably resulted in death. Holmes stood up. Mr. Voss, you've been very helpful. We'll probably need a sketch. We'll ask you to describe Evan Cross's face. Of course, whatever is needed. And one more thing. Which direction did the man go after leaving the shop? Voss pointed to the door. He turned left, toward Whitechapel. Holmes walked to the door and looked outside. To the left, narrow streets, old buildings and shadowy corners stretched out. Evan Cross was hiding somewhere in this labyrinth, and Holmes was closer than ever to finding him. Watson Lestrade, said Holmes. We now have concrete evidence. Evan Cross came to this shop on October 15th. He had a key copied, and he said, this time he won't get away. This is evidence of a premeditated murder. But we still need to find him, said Lestrade. We will, said Holmes decisively. We now know what we're looking for. A quiet, unassuming man with dark hair. He stays in cheap boarding houses. He drinks Earl Grey tea, and he always carries a notebook. Watson looked at his friend. Earl Grey. Is that detail important? Holmes smiled slightly. Every detail is important, Watson. Evan Cross is a man with specific habits, and habits give people away. Now, we'll continue searching the boarding houses in Whitechapel. But this time, we'll ask a specific question. In the last 3 weeks, have you had a tenant who consistently asked for Earl Grey tea? Lestrade raised his eyebrows. Do you think that will help? It can't hurt to try, said Holmes, and sometimes the smallest details lead to the biggest results. That night, Holmes didn't sleep again. He sat at his desk studying the map. He had marked it with points. Rose's house, Mrs. Pemberton's boarding house, Daniel Voss's shop. The 3 points formed a triangle. And somewhere within that triangle, Evan Cross was waiting. I will find you, Holmes said quietly. No matter where you hide, I will find you. Outside, London's nighttime silence had fallen. But for Holmes, the hunt had only just begun. Chapter 6. The pieces come together. The next day, heavy rain fell on London. The sky was covered with leaden clouds and the streets had turned into muddy rivers. But neither the rain nor the cold could stop Holmes. With the first light of dawn, the detective was already on the move. In the meeting room on Baker Street, Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade gathered around the table. Spread out on the table were all the documents collected over the past few days. Rose's diary, Evan's letters, witness statements, Daniel Voss's description, Clara Whitmore's account. "Today," said Holmes, "is the time to put the pieces together. We have enough information. Now we need to fit it all into a single picture." Lestrade opened his notebook. "My men continued searching the boarding houses in Whitechapel last night, and this morning. 12 boarding houses were visited. In 3 of them, tenants matching Evan's description were reported." "Which ones?" Lestrade looked at his notes. "The first was Miller's, lodge on Brick Lane, but the tenant there turned out to be a 60-year-old man. The second was the Crown Inn on Commercial Street. There was a man there too, but he had blonde hair. The third—" Lestrade paused. Holmes leaned forward. "The third one?" "Harrow's boarding house, just 1 street over from Grimsby Lane. The owner said he had a tenant matching our description in the last 3 weeks. Dark-haired, slender, quiet man. And the man was always brewing his own tea. Earl Grey." Holmes's eyes lit up. He jumped to his feet. "What was the address?" "Harrow's boarding house, 22 Plumbers Row." "We're going right now." Watson also stood up. "Holmes, wait. We need to make a plan first. Evan is dangerous. He might have a weapon." Holmes paused for a moment. Watson was right. Evan Cross was dangerous, like a cornered animal. It was unclear what he might do if he panicked. "Lestrade," said Holmes, "how many men do you have?" "4 are here, ready. I can call for more." "4 is enough, but we must be careful. We'll surround the building quietly. Evan must have no escape route. Then we'll go in." Lestrade nodded and headed for the door. "I'll gather the men. We'll be ready in 10 minutes." The rain was still pouring down. Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade, along with 4 police officers, made their way toward Plumbers Row. The street was one of Whitechapel's typical narrow, dark streets. On both sides were dilapidated buildings, rusty balconies, dirty windows. Number 22 was a 3-story brick building in the middle of the street. Its facade was covered in soot and grime. Next to the entrance door hung a faded sign, "Harrow's boarding house, rooms by the day and week." Holmes examined the building. His eyes scanned the windows. On the second floor, a curtain at one window stirred slightly. Someone was looking out from inside. "Second floor," Holmes said in a low voice. "I saw movement." Lestrade signalled to his men. 2 officers circled around to the back of the building, while the other 2 took positions beside the entrance door. "Are you ready?" Lestrade asked. Holmes nodded. "Let's go." They pushed the door open and went inside. A dim corridor, the smell of mould and dampness. A door on the left, with a manager written on it. Holmes knocked on the door. A few seconds later, the door opened and an old man appeared. In his 60s, hunched over, partially bald, with a suspicious look in his eyes. "What do you want?" he asked gruffly. "Mr. Harrow," said Lestrade, showing his badge. "Police. We need to ask you some questions about one of your tenants." The man's face changed. Suspicion gave way to concern. "Who are we asking about?" "A man who's been staying here for the past few weeks. Dark-haired, slender, quiet, drinks Earl Grey tea." Mr. Harrow nodded. "Mr. Smith, 2nd floor, room 4. He arrived 3 weeks ago. Pays cash rent, doesn't talk to anyone. A strange fellow." "Is he in his room right now?" "I don't know. I saw him last night, but not this morning." Holmes headed for the stairs. "Watson, Lestrade, come with me. The others wait here." They climbed the stairs quietly. When they reached the 2nd floor, they saw a narrow corridor. 4 doors, each with a number on it. Room 4 was at the end of the corridor. Holmes approached the door and listened. There was no sound coming from inside. Silence. He knocked lightly on the door. No response. "Mr. Smith," he called out, "will you open the door?" Again, silence. Holmes looked at Lestrade. The inspector nodded and drew his gun. Watson did the same. Holmes turned the door handle. It wasn't locked. The door creaked open slightly. The room was small and dark. A single window, curtains drawn, a bed, a table, a chair, and on the walls. Holmes entered and stopped. His breath caught. The walls were covered with papers, photographs, notes, maps, and in the middle, on the largest sheet of paper, rose Delaney's face. Smiling, happy, alive. Around it, notes, written in red ink, "You're mine. I'll never let you go. We'll be together. Forever." Watson stared at the walls in horror. My God, this is madness. Holmes began examining the room. On the table sat a half-drunk cup of tea. Earl Grey, now cold. Beside it, a small black notebook. Holmes picked up the notebook and opened it. The pages were densely written. Dates, times, places. Every movement, every step Rose had taken was recorded. October 15th, 8 a.m. Rose left the house. She's going to work. She's wearing a blue dress. She looks beautiful, as always. October 15th, 6:30 p.m. Rose left work with Nina. They're laughing. I wish she'd laugh with me too. October 16th, 10 p.m. Rose is home. The curtains are closed, but the light is on. What is she doing? Is she thinking of me? October 20th, I went to the locksmith today. The key is ready. Now I can be with her any time, even if she doesn't notice. Holmes continued turning the pages. Each page showed the obsession deepening. Transitions from love to hate, from passion to anger. And, on the last pages, threats. October 25th. Rose still isn't responding. Why? I gave her everything. She should give me something in return. It's fair. It's right. October 27th. I've lost my patience. I'll talk to her face to face, and this time I won't let her say no. And the final entry, the night Rose died. October 28th, tonight. It's inevitable now. She'll be with me or with no one. Holmes closed the notebook. His hands were trembling. He didn't know if it was from anger or sadness, maybe both. "This notebook," he said slowly, "is Evan Cross's confession. Everything is here, the planning, the stalking, the obsession, and the record of the night of the murder." Lestrade looked at the notebook. "Is this enough evidence for court?" "More than enough," said Holmes. "But first we need to find Evan, and apparently he's not here." Watson walked to the window and opened the curtain. Outside, the rain was still falling. Where could he have gone? Holmes examined the room again. He looked under the bed, opened the drawers. In a corner there was a small bag. Inside were a few shirts, a pair of pants, shaving supplies. Evan's belongings. "His things are here," said Holmes. "So he hasn't left permanently. He'll come back." "Should we wait?" asked Lestrade. Holmes thought for a moment. "No. Evan is a cautious man. He may have noticed the police. Perhaps he's secretly watching the building, checking if it's safe. Then what should we do?" Holmes looked out the window. The street was deserted in the rain, but somewhere, in the shadows, Evan Cross might be watching. "Let's talk to the neighbours," said Holmes. "The other tenants in this building. Maybe someone saw where Evan went, or can give us an idea of where he might have gone." Within an hour, Holmes had spoken to all the tenants in the building. Most had either never seen Evan or had only noticed him passing by. But one witness provided valuable information. Mrs. Agnes Cole was an elderly woman living on the first floor. She had seen Evan a few times. "He was a strange man," said Mrs. Cole. "He never spoke, But every morning he would leave at dawn, and every evening he would return late at night. It was as if he lived somewhere else during the day. "Did you ever see where he went?" asked Holmes. "I followed him once," said Mrs. Cole, a little embarrassed. "I was curious. He went toward Grimsby Lane. There he entered a church." "A church?" "Yes, St. Michael's. An old, disused church. It's been closed for years." But the man went inside. Holmes looked at Lestrade. "St. Michael's. Do you know where it is?" Lestrade nodded. "Yes, at the end of Grimsby Lane. It's been slated for demolition for years, but no one cares." "Evan could be hiding there," said Holmes. "A second hideout. He's only using the boarding house as his official address, but he's actually living there." Watson frowned. "But why a church?" "Because no one looks there," said Holmes. "A deserted, forgotten place. The perfect hiding spot. And it fits Evan's profile. Dark, isolated, under control." Holmes took his hat. "We're going to St. Michael's. Right now." St. Michael's Church was at the end of Grimsby Lane, at the end of a dead-end street. A Gothic structure, its spire half collapsed, its windows broken, its door boarded up. Rain ran down the building's darkened stones, as if the church were crying. Holmes examined the building. There was a gap in one of the wooden planks. Someone had removed the planks and entered inside. "They entered through here," said Holmes, "and are probably still inside." Lestrade signalled to his men. "Surround the building. Make sure no exit points are left open." The officers took their positions. Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade slipped inside through the gap between the planks. The interior of the church was not as ruined as the exterior. It was dusty and dark, but still standing. The pews were overturned. The altar collapsed, but the walls were intact. And in one corner, a light. Candlelight. Holmes moved forward silently. As he approached the light, a figure began to take shape. A man, his back turned, sat at a table. Before him, papers and a candle. "Evan Cross," Holmes said aloud. The man froze. He didn't move for a moment. Then he slowly turned around. Evan Cross was just as described. Medium height, thin build, dark hair. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. But in those eyes, a dark light burned. Madness or despair? It was hard to tell. Who's there?" Evan asked, his voice trembling. Holmes stepped forward. "Sherlock Holmes. And you, Evan Cross, are Rose Delaney's murderer." Evan's face changed. Fear gave way to anger. You can't understand. None of you can understand." "What can't we understand?" Holmes asked calmly. "Love? Obsession? Or taking a woman's life?" "I loved her," Evan shouted. "No one could love her like I did. But she rejected me. She left me. I gave her everything. What did she give me? Nothing." Holmes was slowly approaching. "Love doesn't kill people, Evan. What you felt wasn't love. It was possessiveness, a need for control. And Rose wasn't yours. She never was." Tears began to stream down Evan's face. "She was mine. We were made for each other. She just couldn't see it. I tried to show her, but she wouldn't listen. She never listened." "And you killed her?" Evan bowed his head. I didn't want to. I just wanted to talk. That night I went. I used the key to get in. I saw her. She was beautiful as ever. I begged her, 'Be with me,' I said. 'Let's start over.' But what did she say? She said, 'Never. I hate you. I never want to see your face again.' And in her eyes, there was disgust. She looked at me like that, as if I were a bug." Evan's hands were shaking. I lost control. I had a knife in my pocket. I always carried it, for protection. And then Then my hand moved on its own, and Rose fell to the ground. The room fell into a heavy silence. Evan's confession echoed off the walls. Outside, the rain had intensified. Lestrade stepped forward. "Evan Cross, you are under arrest for the murder of Rose Delaney. Anything you say can be used against you." Evan didn't resist. He let his arms hang at his sides, bowing his head, as if all his strength had been drained. "Tell her," he whispered. "Tell Rose that I loved her, that I will love her forever." Holmes looked at the man. There was no anger or pity on his face, only exhaustion, and perhaps deep sorrow. "Rose can't hear you anymore, Evan," he said quietly. "When you silenced her, everything ended." The officers took Evan away and led him out. Holmes remained there for a moment, in the darkness of the abandoned church. The candle still burned, its flickering light making the shadows on the walls dance. Watson came over to his friend. "It's over, Holmes. You found her." Holmes shook his head. "Yes, but it's too late for Rose. It's always too late." When they stepped outside, the rain had stopped. A faint sunlight filtered through the clouds. London was returning to its usual life. People were walking, cars were passing, vendors were shouting. But for Holmes, the case was not yet over. Evan Cross had been caught, but justice had not yet been served. The court, the trial, the verdict, all lay ahead. And Rose Delaney was still dead. Nothing could bring her back. No justice could compensate for a life lost. Holmes looked up at the sky. The sun was disappearing behind the clouds. "Let's go home, Watson," he said in a weary voice. "Tomorrow is a new day." Chapter 7. The Light of Justice. The days following Evan Cross's arrest were ordinary ones for London. The city continued with its usual bustle. Workers went to factories, merchants sold their wares, children played in the streets. But at 221B Baker Street, the atmosphere was different. The calm that comes with the closure of a case permeated every corner of the house. Holmes had slept in that morning. The fatigue of the past few days had finally caught up with him. When Watson found his friend at the breakfast table, he noticed that the tension on the detective's face had eased slightly. "Good morning, Holmes," Watson said, pouring his tea. "Did you sleep well?" Holmes was sitting in his chair by the window, watching the street outside. "Yes, Watson. For the first time in days, a dreamless sleep. The mind cannot rest when preoccupied with an unsolved puzzle. But now, the case is closed." "It's closed," said Holmes, but there was no complete satisfaction in his voice. "At least, our part of it. The rest is up to justice." Watson sat down beside his friend. "Any news from Lestrade?" "A telegram arrived this morning. Evan Cross has been formally charged. Murder and premeditation. The court date has been set for next month." "And the evidence?" Holmes looked at the file on the table. "It's all there. Evan's notebook, his letters, Daniel Voss's testimony, Mrs. Pemberton's statement, Clara Whitmore's confirmation of the previous case, and most importantly, Rose's photographs and notes found in Evan's boarding house. It's enough for the court. More than enough." Watson exhaled in relief. "Then justice will be served." "Yes," said Holmes. "But Watson, justice is sometimes delayed. Justice for Rose Delaney won't bring her back. It will only provide closure for her family, for her friends, and perhaps it will prevent Evan from doing something like this again." There was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Hudson entered. She held a card in her hand. "Mr. Holmes, you have a visitor, Inspector Lestrade." Holmes nodded. "Send him in, Mrs. Hudson." A few seconds later, Lestrade entered the room. His face bore a rare expression of satisfaction. "Holmes, Watson," he said, greeting them. "I have good news." "Sit down, Lestrade," said Holmes. "Tell me." Lestrade sat down in the chair and placed his hat on his knees. "While searching Evan Cross's room, we found something else. In the church, there was a secret compartment under his desk. Inside was the knife, the murder weapon." Holmes's eyes lit up. "So he didn't hide the knife?" "No. And there are bloodstains on it. The lab confirmed the blood matches Rose Delaney's. That's definitive proof." Watson sighed. "No defense will hold up now." "Exactly," said Lestrade. "Evan's lawyer will probably try to argue insanity, but the jury will convict him in the face of such concrete evidence." Holmes stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was shining brightly on the streets. The rain of recent days had stopped, and London could breathe again. "Lestrade," said Holmes, his back turned, "has Rose's family been informed?" "Yes, I told Arthur Delaney last night." The man cried, but he was also relieved. "Thank you for my daughter," he said. "Now she can rest in peace." Holmes turned. There was a rare soft expression on his face. "Mr. Delaney is a good man. He loved his daughter very much. At least now he can live knowing that her killer has been caught." "And Clara Whitmore," said Watson. "Was she informed?" "Yes," said Lestrade. "I sent a telegram to Brighton. Clara expressed her gratitude in her reply. 'Now, I can sleep without fear at night,' she wrote." Holmes walked to the table and took Evan's notebook. He flipped through the pages looking at this dark document, line by line, one last time. "This notebook," he said, "is proof of how dark the human mind can be. Evan Cross never understood that what he thought was love was actually a disease. Possession, control, obsession. These are not love. These are love's greatest enemies." Watson looked at his friend. "Holmes, have you ever felt such an emotion? So intense, so destructive?" Holmes paused for a moment, his eyes fixed on a distant point. "No, Watson. I've learned to keep my emotions in check, perhaps too much so. But it protects me. Emotions can be dangerous for the mind. They cloud, distort, deceive. And as we saw in the case of Evan Cross, they can kill." Lestrade stood up. "Holmes, Watson, I want to thank you. This case couldn't have been solved without your help. Scotland Yard is grateful." Holmes smiled slightly. "You're welcome, Lestrade. After all, we're all working toward the same goal. Justice." Lestrade put on his hat and headed for the door. "I'll let you know the court date. You may be required to testify." "I'll be there," said Holmes, "for Rose Delaney." After Lestrade left, the room fell silent for a moment. Holmes sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. Watson watched his friend. He looked tired, but peaceful. "What are you thinking, Holmes?" Watson finally asked. Holmes opened his eyes. "I'm thinking, Watson, that this case has taught me something. Sometimes the darkest shadows hide behind the most familiar faces. Evan Cross seemed ordinary from the outside, quiet, unobtrusive, harmless. But inside he carried a destructive darkness, and Rose Delaney became a victim of that darkness. It's hard to truly know people," Watson said thoughtfully. "Impossible," said Holmes. "We can only observe, we can analyze, and we can hope that what we see reflects the truth. But there is always a mystery. The human mind is the most complex puzzle in the universe." Watson walked to the window and looked outside. On the street, a flower cart was passing by. Colourful flowers glowed in the sunlight. "Holmes," said Watson, "this case has affected me too. Rose Delaney's story, tragic. But at the same time, finding justice for her gave it meaning." Holmes looked at his friend. "You're a good man, Watson. Your heart sometimes overrides your logic. That's not weakness, it's strength." Watson turned and smiled. "Hearing you say that is rare." "It's valuable because it's rare," said Holmes, smiling slightly. "And now, Watson, I think we deserve a little rest. What do you say? There's a concert this afternoon at the Royal Albert Hall. Buck, perhaps we'll go." Watson looked surprised. It was rare for Holmes to show interest in social events. "Of course, Holmes. I'd be delighted." That afternoon, the two friends went to the Royal Albert Hall. The concert hall was filled with people in elegant attire. Crystal chandeliers, gold decorations, velvet seats. Everything was magnificent and peaceful. Holmes and Watson took their seats in the upper balcony. The orchestra was tuning their instruments. The sounds of violins, flute melodies, and cello tones mingled together. "What a beautiful place," said Watson, looking around. "How long has it been since you last attended a concert here?" "A very long time," said Holmes. "Cases take up most of my time. But sometimes you have to stop and appreciate beauty. Life isn't just about crime and punishment." The conductor stepped onto the stage and the audience applauded. Then silence fell and the music began. Bach's Brandenburg concertos filled the hall. The melodies were sometimes cheerful, sometimes sad, but always beautiful. Holmes had closed his eyes and lost himself in the music. The expression on his face reflected a serenity Watson rarely saw. Watson thought as he watched his friend. Sherlock Holmes was one of the most intelligent people in the world. A genius who caught criminals, solved mysteries, and ensured justice. But he was also someone who could be captivated by the beauty of music, who valued friendship, who was human. The concert ended and the audience gave a standing ovation. Holmes also stood up, a satisfied smile on his face. "It was magnificent," he said. "Bach was a genius. His music is the poetry of mathematics." As they stepped outside, the evening sun bathed London in a golden glow. The streets had softened in the warmth of the sunset. "Shall we walk?" said Holmes. "To Baker Street. The weather is nice." Watson nodded and they began to walk. They passed by Hyde Park, watching the light filtering through the trees. Birds were singing, children were running, couples were walking hand in hand. "Holmes," Watson said, "do you think Rose Delaney was happy until the end of her life?" Holmes paused for a moment. "I suppose she had her happy moments, Watson. Her friends, her work, her dreams. But her final months? They were dark. Evan's shadow had fallen over her. And in the end, that shadow swallowed her whole. But now at least the story has been told. The murderer has been caught. Justice has been served." "Yes," said Holmes. "And perhaps Rose's spirit is at peace now, if you believe in such things." Watson looked at his friend. "Don't you believe?" Holmes smiled. "I, Watson, believe in evidence. But sometimes I feel there is something beyond the evidence. Perhaps intuition, perhaps faith, perhaps just hope. I don't know. But to think that Rose Delaney is no longer suffering, it's a pleasant thought." When they reached Baker Street, the sky was turning purple. The first stars were appearing. Holmes stopped at the door of 221B and looked up. "It was a beautiful day, Watson," he said. "I haven't had a day like this in a long time." "Absolutely," said Watson. "And I think we should do this more often. Between cases, enjoy life." Holmes nodded. "You're right. Maybe I'm learning this as I get older. Life isn't just about puzzles. Sometimes simply being is beautiful." They went inside. Mrs. Hudson greeted them with a warm meal. They sat in their comfortable chairs in front of the fireplace. Outside, London was settling into the night. "Holmes," said Watson, taking a sip of his wine, "will you write about this case? Add it to your notes?" "Yes," said Holmes. "But this time you should write it, Watson. Your pen is more vivid than my notes. And Rose Delaney's story. It deserves to be told." Watson nodded thoughtfully. "I will write it. But how should I end it? Every story must have an ending." Holmes gazed at the flames in the fireplace. The dance of orange and yellow held a hypnotic beauty. "End it like this," he said slowly. "In the dark streets of London, shadows always lie in wait. But in those same streets there is also light. Those who fight for justice, those who seek the truth, those who defy the darkness. And Rose Delaney's story reminds us, behind every shadow, there is a light, and that light never goes out." Watson looked at his friend. "Beautiful words, Holmes. I wouldn't have expected that from you." Holmes smiled slightly. "I didn't expect it from myself either. Perhaps this case has changed me, a little." As the night wore on, the two friends fell silent. The warmth of the fireplace, the pleasure of the wine, the weariness of the day, all combined to create a peaceful atmosphere. Watson wrote his final notes and closed his notebook. "It's done," he said. "The story of Rose Delaney." Holmes looked at his friend. "Thank you, Watson, for her sake and for mine." Outside, London slept. Street lamps cast their faint glow. Night watchmen patrolled, and at 221B Baker Street, two friends celebrated the closing of a case. Tomorrow would be a new day. New cases, new puzzles, new challenges. But tonight, everything was peaceful. Everything was in its place. Rose Delaney was finally at peace. Evan Cross had been brought to justice. And Sherlock Holmes had once again conquered the darkness, because in the shadows of London there was always a light, and that light never faded.